Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the story's history left behind. Let's begin.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a sledgehammer to one of the biggest pillars of the American West. I'm willing to bet that every single person listening right now recognizes the name we're about to discuss. It's a name that is practically synonymous with California, with the frontier, and most importantly, with gold.
We are, of course, talking about John Sutter.
Sutter, yeah.
Yeah.
Just saying, it summons a specific image, doesn't it? You picture the rugged pioneer.
The pickaxe, the mill.
Exactly. Sutter's Mill and the beginning of the whole California dream. It's the version of history we all got in grade school.
The nice, clean textbook version.
Yeah, where he's the sort of benevolent grandfather of the gold rush.
But if we've learned anything on this show, it's that the textbook version usually leaves out the most interesting and, well, often the most disturbing parts of the story.
And that is an understatement here. We have a serious stack of sources to work through today. We've got biographical excerpts, contemporary diaries from the 1840s.
Legal texts, which are fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Land grants, articles about recent events, and we even have some very strange local ghost stories from a small town in Pennsylvania, of all places.
And when you lay all these sources out side by side, that picture of the heroic pioneer just completely dissolves.
It shatters.
Yeah. Instead, you find a story that is so much darker, much stranger, and frankly, completely contradictory.
It really feels like you're looking at two different men. On one side, you have the captain, the Baron of the Sacramento Valley.
Right. The man on the statue.
But on the other side, the sources reveal a serial debtor, a fugitive who fled Europe to avoid prison, a man who abandoned his wife and 5 children. A
political chameleon who would change flags whenever it suited him, and a brutal colonizer.
It's a classic case of the myth just totally eclipsing the man. And the central irony, which we will absolutely get to, is that the thing he is most famous for.
The gold rush.
The gold rush is actually the thing that destroyed him.
Completely and totally.
The details here are just wild. I mean, we're talking about a guy who reinvents himself as a captain of the Swiss Guard. A complete lie.
Builds a private empire in what was then Mexico, loses it all, and somehow ends up buried in a trench in Lititz, Pennsylvania.
That burial story. I can't wait to get to that.
It's the perfect metaphor for his entire life. It really is.
So let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand the ending and to understand the ghost, we have to start at the beginning. Because John Sutter didn't start out as John Sutter.
No, he did not.
Yeah.
If you rewind the clock to 1803, we find him born as Johann August Sutter.
Johann.
Yeah, Johann. This was in Kandern, in modern-day Germany, though his parents were Swiss. And if you're looking for signs of, like, a great explorer or a military tactician in his early life,
You're going to be disappointed.
You're going to be very disappointed.
So what do we find instead?
We find a lot of bad math.
Yeah.
And a lot of debt.
Right. So he wasn't born into nobility or anything like that?
Far from it. He spent his early adulthood trying to climb the social ladder. He worked as a clerk in, clothing shops, trying to get a foothold in the merchant class.
Okay.
Eventually, he marries a woman named Annette, who came from a somewhat wealthy family. And her mother, Sutter's mother-in-law, sets him up in business in Bergdorf, Switzerland.
And this wasn't some grand enterprise. This was a haberdashery.
A haberdashery and dry goods store. He was selling buttons, threads, cloths, that kind of thing. But the problem, according to all the biographies, is that Johann Sutter had a taste for the finer things in life.
A taste that a haberdasher's salary couldn't really support.
Exactly. He loved fine clothes, he loved books, he loved socializing.
He was living the champagne lifestyle on a button budget.
Precisely. And he spent more time buying these expensive uniforms for the local militia, where he held a very minor rank, than he did actually balancing the books.
Oh, of course he did.
So by 1834, the walls are closing in, he's drowning in debt. And you have to remember, in 19th century Europe, bankruptcy wasn't just a financial state.
It was criminal.
It was a criminal offense. You could go to debtor's prison.
A real, actual prison.
So here's the first major pivot point in his life.
Yeah.
He's 31 years old. He has a wife, Annette. He has 5 children. Some sources say 4. But the consensus seems to be 5.
Okay.
The creditors are knocking at the door. The police are probably not far behind. Does he man up and face the consequences?
He does not. And this is the part that really sets the tone for his entire character, for everything that follows. He runs.
He abandons them. And I just want to pause on that for a second, because it's not just that he left to find work somewhere else. He fled to save his own skin.
Right.
He left Annette and those 5 children to face the poorhouse, to face the immense social shame of his bankruptcy. He essentially threw them to the wolves.
He gets a French passport, sneaks out of the country, boards a ship called the Sully, and sails to New York in July 1834.
And the moment he steps off that boat in America, Johann, the bankrupt shopkeeper, is dead.
He's gone.
The reinvention begins immediately. He starts introducing himself not as a failed merchant, but as Captain John Augustus Sutter.
It's the ultimate fake it till you make it. But what's so interesting to me is his route to California. If you look at a map, he takes the most inefficient, bizarre route possible.
It looks completely crazy on paper.
It does.
But it makes perfect sense if you realize his goal wasn't just to get there, it was to get there as somebody. He needed to build a network.
So he starts in St. Louis.
Right. Tries the merchant game again. He actually gets involved in the Santa Fe trade for a bit, trading goods between Missouri and what was then Mexico.
And how did that go?
About as well as the haberdashery.
Oh, no.
He lost his investment, failed again. So in 1838, he decides, okay, time to head west for real. He joins a group of fur trappers and missionaries on the Oregon Trail.
Which is a grueling journey in itself.
It is. But he makes it to Fort Vancouver, which is up in the Pacific Northwest, near modern-day Portland.
Okay, so if you're at Fort Vancouver and you want to go to California, the logical thing to do is head south. It's right there.
You just go down the coast.
But he doesn't do that.
He couldn't. It was winter, and the trails through the Siskiyou Mountains were blocked by snow. The locals told him to wait until spring. But Sutter, our captain, he didn't want to wait.
Of course not.
He finds a ship called the Columbia that's heading out. But it's not going to California.
Where is it going?
The Sandwich Islands. Hawaii.
So he sails thousands of miles in the completely wrong direction.
He does. And he spends 4 months in Honolulu. And this is crucial because this is where the captain persona really gets polished. Yeah. He didn't spend those 4 months working on a plantation or anything.
No, he spent them charming the upper crust of Honolulu society.
Exactly. The sources mention he's hanging out with the American and British consuls, with all the wealthy merchants.
He was schmoozing.
He was schmoozing. He was telling these stories about his time in the Royal Swiss Guard of France, stories that were totally made up. Yeah. And because he had charisma and because he was European, people bought it.
And he gets letters of introduction.
He secures letters of introduction.
Yeah.
He builds credibility out of thin air.
And then even from Hawaii, he doesn't go straight to California. This is the part that kills me.
No. He takes another detour. He charters a ride on a ship going to Sitka, Alaska.
Alaska?
Yes, to New Archangel, which was the capital of Russian America at the time.
Why on earth would he go to Alaska if he wants to be a farmer in California?
Because the Russians had a presence in California, Fort Ross. Sutter knew that if you wanted to be a player in California, knowing the Russians would be a huge advantage.
So he's thinking ahead.
He goes to Sitka, spends a month dining with the Russian governor, a man named Kuprianov. He's attending balls, he's dancing, he's drinking their vodka.
He is networking on a continental scale.
That's a perfect way to put it. So by the time he finally sails into Yerba Buena, what we now call San Francisco, in 1839, he's not just some broke guy from Switzerland.
No, he arrives on a ship chartered from the Russians, carrying letters of recommendation from merchants in Hawaii and consuls across the Pacific. He arrives with an aura.
That is genius in a completely sociopathic kind of way.
Right.
He manufactured his own importance before he even set foot on the land.
And that aura was the only currency he had.
The only thing he had.
So let's look at the California he stepped into. This is 1839, pre-gold rush. What was the landscape?
It was a province of Mexico, but it was really on the fringes of the Mexican Empire.
Yeah.
Very sparsely populated by Mexican citizens, the Californios. But the vast majority of the population was indigenous.
Right.
We're talking tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Native Americans living in the interior valleys.
And politically, it was a mess.
A complete mess. The Mexican government down in Monterey was terrified. They had Americans pushing in from the east, the Russians at Fort Ross in the north. The British Navy was sniffing around the coast. They were losing control.
And into this mess walks Captain Sutter. He goes to Monterey to meet the governor, Juan Bautista Alvarado, and he makes a pitch.
It was the perfect pitch for a desperate governor. Sutter basically told Alvarado, look, I want to go into the Central Valley, which the Mexicans considered dangerous, untamed wilderness, and I want to build a settlement.
And the hook was?
The hook was security. He told Alvarado that his settlement, which he would fortify, would act as a buffer. He promised he would hold back the savage Indians, his words, and he promised to stop the encroaching Americans and Russians.
I'll be your wall.
I will be the wall that protects Mexican California.
And Alvarado buys it.
He bought it hook, line, and sinker. In 1840, Sutter is granted Mexican citizenship, and in 1841, he's given a land grant of nearly 49,000 acres.
49,000 acres for a guy who was bankrupt just a few years earlier. It's astounding.
He named it New Helvetia, New Switzerland.
And this is where he builds Sutter's Fort. And this is where the myth of the captain becomes tangible. I mean, he starts wearing a uniform, right?
He does. He styles himself as a European feudal lord. He tells everyone he was a former captain of the Swiss Guard who had been displaced by the French Revolution.
Was there any truth to that? Any at all?
None. Zero. But in a frontier society, there's no internet to fact-check your background. If you've got a fort and cannons and land, and you act like a captain,
People call you captain.
people call you captain.
But there's a huge double cross here. He promised Alvarado he would stop American immigration.
And he did the exact opposite. He realized pretty quickly that the Americans were the future of the region. So instead of stopping them, he became their welcome center.
So when American settlers crossed the mountains, starving and exhausted,
They didn't find a Mexican checkpoint. They found Sutter's Fort.
and he gave them supplies.
He gave them supplies, he gave them a place to rest, and crucially, he issued them fake passports. He had absolutely no authority to do this, but he created documents allowing them to stay in Mexican territory.
So he's actively undermining the very government that gave him the land.
He was playing both sides against the middle. He later wrote in his memoirs, quite proudly, "I gave passports to those entering the country. I encouraged immigration while they discouraged it."
He was betting that when the U.S. eventually took over, they'd remember that he helped them.
And it was a good bet.
Okay, so we have the political maneuvering, we have the land grant. He wants to build this agricultural utopia. But you can't farm 49,000 acres by yourself. You need labor.
And this brings us to the section of the story that really just stops you in your tracks.
This is the part of the story that the textbooks usually skip, where they gloss over it with a phrase like, he employed local Indians.
Employed is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It's entirely the wrong word.
It is. We need to be very clear about what the sources, the primary sources from the 1840s reveal. Sutter's empire was built on a system of coerced labor that was, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from slavery.
The sources describe his philosophy very clearly. He believed that the Native Americans, specifically the Miwok, Maidu, Nisenan, and Ohlone people, needed to be kept strictly under fear.
That was his management style, fear. He didn't pay wages in the traditional sense. He created a system of debt peonage and forced confinement.
I want to get into the specifics because the details are horrifying. We have accounts from Heinrich Lienhard, who was actually Sutter's overseer.
And James Kleiman, a frontiersman who visited the fort.
And they described the living conditions for the workers.
They described them as sleeping in locked rooms. No beds, just bare floors, no sanitation. Lienhard wrote that when he unlocked the rooms in the morning to let the workforce out, the odor was overwhelming.
So it wasn't a dormitory, it was a holding cell.
Exactly.
And the feeding.
Yeah.
This is the image that I think will stick with listeners.
The trope.
Yeah. Describe what they saw.
Multiple eyewitnesses described the feeding time. They didn't have tables or plates or anything like that. Sutter had hollowed out tree trunks, troughs, set up in the courtyard. And the cooks would pour this mush or gruel into the troughs.
James Kleiman wrote in 1846, and I'm quoting here, "The captain keeps 600 to 800 Indians in a complete state of slavery. All the laborers, great and small, ran to the troughs like so many pigs and fed themselves with their hands."
Like pigs. That phrase appears in multiple accounts. It was intentional degradation. Sutter wanted to establish a clear hierarchy where he was the lord and they were essentially the livestock.
And what happened if they refused, if they tried to leave?
The sources are brutal on this. Whipping was common, jailing, and execution. Sutter had his own private army of indigenous men that he had trained to enforce his will on the others. He pitted groups against each other.
And it gets darker. We have to talk about the sexual violence.
We do. Heinrich Lienhard, who again worked for Sutter, recorded in his diary that Sutter regularly sexually assaulted indigenous women and children. He specifically mentions girls as young as 12.
And the child trafficking.
That was a revenue stream for him. Sutter was known to kidnap Native children and sell them or gift them to his creditors or to friends in other parts of California.
This was so blatant that even Governor Alvarado,
The guy who gave him the land in the first place.
yeah, even he publicly complained in 1845 that Sutter had no scruples about depriving Indian mothers of their children.
And the guy who enabled you is telling you to tone it down. You know it's bad.
Yeah.
Even at the time, visitors to the fort were shocked by the brutality.
But, and this is a really critical piece of context, when the Americans eventually took over, they didn't stop this system.
No, they codified it. They made it legal.
Mm.
We often think of the American West as this lawless place, but the laws that were passed were weaponized. In 1850, the new state of California passed something called the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians.
Which sounds nice. Protection.
It's an Orwellian title. The act effectively legalized the enslavement of Native people. It allowed white settlers to take custody of Native children for apprenticeships and allow them to bail Native adults out of jail in exchange for their labor.
It created a legal framework for what Sutter was already doing.
Exactly. And the sources also mention a war of extermination.
Yeah, that phrase.
That phrase comes directly from the first elected American governor of California, Peter Burnett, in 1851. He told the legislature that a war of extermination will continue to be waged until the Indian race becomes extinct.
And the state government actually backed that up with money.
Millions of dollars. They allocated funds to reimburse militias for bullets and supplies used to hunt and kill Native people.
So Sutter wasn't an anomaly. He was a pioneer of the genocide.
He set the template. His fort was the prototype for how the incoming rush of American settlers would treat the indigenous population of California.
That is a heavy reality to sit with. It just completely reframes that entire pioneer narrative.
It does.
But while Sutter is running this brutal labor camp, the political situation in California is exploding. And Sutter, being the chameleon he is trying to figure out which flag to salute.
He was always looking for the winning horse. In 1845, there was a civil war of sorts in California, a revolt against Mexican governor Micheltrina.
And Sutter sided with Micheltrina. Why?
Micheltrina had confirmed his land titles. So Sutter's loyalty was bought. He became the Comandante Militar. He actually raised an army to fight the rebels.
And he didn't just ask for volunteers, did he?
No, he bullied people. There's a famous account of him forcing John Marsh, another prominent immigrant, to join his army or face arrest.
Yeah.
He marched his army south toward Los Angeles to fight.
And how did the great captain fare in actual battle?
It was a complete farce. The battle mostly consisted of artillery firing from miles away and hitting absolutely nothing.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, the Americans on Sutter's side realized they were fighting against other Americans on the rebel side, and they just stopped fighting.
He just quit.
They quit. Sutter was captured, humiliated, and was only allowed to return home after pledging loyalty to the New Mexican authorities.
So he strikes out there.
Completely. Then the Mexican-American War looms. Sutter starts writing letters. We have these in the archives, flirting with the idea of French protection. He thought maybe France would take over California.
He would serve anyone but the people actually in charge.
Anyone who would let him keep his kingdom. But then the Bear Flag Revolt happens. American settlers seize Sonoma. The U.S. Navy raises the Stars and Stripes in Monterey.
And Sutter sees which way the wind is blowing.
He sees it blowing from Washington, and he pivots instantly.
July 11th, 1846.
He raises the American flag over Sutter's fort. He accepts a commission in the U.S. Army. And just like that, the Swiss-Mexican officer is now an American patriot.
And you would think, okay, he's done it. He picked the winning side. The U.S. now controls California. He has the land. He has the fort. He has the forced labor. He is poised to become the richest man in the West.
He was perfectly positioned. And then fate played the cruelest trick imaginable on him.
The gold rush.
The gold rush.
It's January 24th, 1848. Sutter has sent a carpenter, a guy named James Marshall, up into the foothills to build a sawmill because he needs lumber for his expanding agricultural empire.
Right.
Marshall looks down into the tail race, the water channel, and sees something shiny.
It was about the size of a pea. Marshall picked it up. It was malleable. He rode all the way back to the fort and showed it to Sutter in secret.
Now, in the movie version of this story, Sutter jumps for joy. We're rich! But the reality was very, very different.
Sutter was terrified. The sources describe him being visibly upset. They consulted an encyclopedia to test the metal. They used nitric acid. They weighed it, and they confirmed it was gold.
And Sutter's immediate reaction was,
We have to keep this a secret.
why? Why would you want to hide a gold mine on your own land?
Because Sutter understood the nature of his power. His power relied on order.
Yeah.
It relied on his feudal system, his serfs working the fields, his crops, his cattle. He knew that if word got out, chaos would follow.
He knew a gold rush would bring a wave of humanity that he couldn't control.
He wanted to be a king, not a mine manager.
But you can't keep gold a secret.
You can't. A man named Samuel Brandon, who ran a store at the fort and a newspaper in San Francisco, found out.
And he saw an opportunity.
Oh, yeah. He realized he could make a fortune selling shovels and pickaxes if he created a rush. So he took a bottle of gold dust, went to San Francisco, and famously ran through the streets shouting, "Gold! Gold from the American River!"
And that was the end of New Helvetia.
The beginning of the end.
Describe the collapse for us, because it wasn't a slow decline, it was an implosion.
It was instantaneous. First, his workforce vanished. The indigenous people and the other workers he had exploited simply walked off the job.
I mean, why would you slave away for Sutter's gruel when you can walk a few miles upstream and maybe pick up a fortune from a riverbed?
Exactly. So the crops rotted in the fields.
Our leatherworks stopped, the mill stopped.
And then came the 49ers, the squatters.
This is the part that really illustrates the locusts comparison I've seen in the sources.
They swarmed his land. They had no respect for his Mexican land titles. They trampled his crops. They shot his cattle for food. They butchered his sheep. They even tore down his barns and fences to use the wood for their own campfires and shelters.
He was being cannibalized by the very gold rush he started.
He was helpless. He tried to charge rent. He tried to enforce his rights, but the mob didn't care. And then the legal system, the American legal system he had bet on, turned on him.
Right, the Supreme Court case.
The U.S. Supreme Court eventually invalidated his title to a massive portion of his land grant, the El Sobrante grant. They ruled the paperwork was flawed.
So, by 1852, just 4 years after the discovery of gold, John Sutter was bankrupt. Again.
The man who owned the land where the gold was found lost everything because of it.
It is the ultimate irony.
The gold rush made the world rich, and it left Sutter with absolutely nothing.
So he spends the next decade or so just trying to recover. He retreats to a place called Hawk Farm, which was his last remaining property on the Feather River.
And even that didn't last. In 1865, a disgruntled employee, probably someone he hadn't paid, set fire to the house.
Burned to the ground.
Hawk Farm burned to the ground. He lost his journals, his collections, everything.
So he's old, he's broke, and now he's homeless. What does a man like Sutter do in that situation? He goes to the manager.
He goes to Washington, D.C. He decided that the United States government owed him.
He becomes a lobbyist for himself.
For the rest of his life.
Yeah.
He moved to D.C. and spent years petitioning Congress. His argument was essentially, I was the pioneer. I paved the way. And your citizens destroyed my property. You owe me.
How much was he asking for?
Millions. He claimed damages for the lost crops, the stolen cattle, the cost of feeding and housing U.S. troops during the transition.
Did he get it?
He got a pittance. The state of California gave him a pension of $250 a month for a while. But he never got the restitution he felt he deserved.
And this brings us to the final chapter. And honestly, this is the weirdest detour in a life full of weird detours. In 1871, he's 68 years old, and he leaves D.C. and moves to Lititz, Pennsylvania.
Lititz. A small, quiet Moravian town in Lancaster County.
Why Lititz? It seems so random.
2 reasons, according to the sources. First, the water. Lititz was famous for its springs. There's a hotel there, the Lititz Springs Hotel, and the water was rumored to cure rheumatism.
And Sutter was old and aching.
Exactly. He liked the spa aspect. And the second reason was the schools. He had grandchildren by this point.
Right, from his son, John Jr.
Yeah, John Jr., who had actually been quite successful in founding the city of Sacramento. Sutter wanted his grandkids to go to the Moravian schools, which had a great reputation.
So he builds a house in Lititz. And despite pleading poverty to Congress, this wasn't some little shack.
Oh, no. It was a $10,000 house. In 1871, that's a mansion. It had a wine cellar, imported bricks. It had hot and cold running water, indoor plumbing.
That's space-age technology for a small town in the 1870s.
He just couldn't help himself. He had to play the Baron until the bitter end.
He was keeping up appearances.
He was. And he lived there with Annette.
Wait, Annette, the wife he abandoned in Switzerland in 1834.
The very same.
They reunited. When did that happen?
They did. In the 1850s, when he still had a little bit of money left, he sent for her. She came to California, lived through the fire at Hawk Farm, and then moved all the way to Pennsylvania with him.
I would love to know what the dinner conversation was like in that house. Pass the salt also. Remember when you left me and our 5 children to starve for 15 years?
The sources say she was very reclusive in Lititz. She barely left the house. One can only imagine the dynamic there.
So Sutter spends his final years just taking the train back and forth to Washington, knocking on doors, begging for his check.
It's kind of a pathetic image. The old general sitting in waiting rooms telling his stories to anyone who would listen.
And the end finally comes in 1880.
June 18th, 1880. Congress adjourns for the session without passing his relief bill. It was the final nail in the coffin. 2 days later, June 20th, Sutter dies in a hotel room in D.C. alone.
He died waiting for a check that never came. But as we promised at the beginning, the story gets even stranger after he dies. We have to talk about the burial.
The wall story. This is my favorite detail in the entire stack of sources. It's just perfect.
So he's buried in Lititz.
Right. He wasn't Moravian, but the town made an exception because he was a local celebrity. They buried him in God's Acre, the Moravian cemetery.
Okay.
Now, 7 years later, in 1887, the U.S. government decides to finally throw him a bone. They couldn't pay him when he was alive, but they voted to honor him in death.
A participation trophy from beyond the grave.
Basically, they allocated funds to build a massive marble wall around his grave. A 7-foot-tall polished marble enclosure.
But there was a problem.
His daughter, Anna Eliza. She was living in Lititz, and she was, let's say, opinionated. She looked at the plans for this wall and said, absolutely not.
Why?
The Moravian cemetery is very egalitarian. All the gravestones are flat, simple white stones.
Yeah.
She thought a 7-foot marble wall would be a monstrosity. She said it would ruin the view and look gaudy.
But the government had already paid the contractors. The stone was there. The workers were there.
So you have a federal mandate to build a 7-foot wall and a grieving daughter forbidding it. So the workers came up with a solution that is just. It's perfect.
What did they do?
They dug a trench. A deep trench, about 6 feet down, all the way around the grave. And they built the 7-foot wall inside the trench.
No way.
Yes. So if you go to Lititz today and visit the grave, you see a marble wall that is only about 1 foot high sticking out of the ground.
The other 6 feet are just buried.
Buried in the dirt.
So the government got their wall and the daughter got her view. That is the most passive-aggressive architectural compromise I have ever heard of.
It's a fitting monument for Sutter, isn't it? A grand, expensive gesture that is mostly buried and hidden from sight.
So Sutter is in the ground.
Yeah.
But his name was everywhere.
Everywhere. Sutter Street in San Francisco, Sutter County, Sutter Creek, the Sutter Health Hospital System, a huge network. For over a century, he was the brand name of California history.
But that has changed dramatically. The legacy has gone through a massive renovation recently.
A necessary reckoning. Around 2020, during the global protests following the murder of George Floyd, there was this widespread re-examination of who we honor with statues.
Right.
And when you actually look at Sutter's resume, the slavery, the child trafficking, the sexual violence, it becomes very hard to justify a statue of him in front of a hospital.
The sources mention that his statue in Sacramento was vandalized.
Someone threw red paint on it, a symbolic act. And shortly after that, the authorities, the hospital system, and city officials, they removed the statue. They released statements citing respect for the viewpoints of the community, particularly the Indigenous community.
And even in tiny Lititz, Pennsylvania, the change happened.
Yes. The General Sutter Inn, which had been the main hotel in town since 1930, officially changed its name to the Lititz Springs Inn. They took his statue out of the lobby.
It's interesting how quickly that myth can collapse once people start reading the actual history, not just the textbook summary.
It shows that monuments aren't permanent. They reflect who we are now and what we value now, not just who people were then.
But speaking of the inn, we can't let you go without the ghost story, because apparently the general is not happy about being canceled.
No, the ghost of General Sutter is a legitimate local legend in Lititz.
So there's a portrait.
Right. There was this old oil portrait of Sutter that hung above the fireplace in the inn's lobby for decades, just, watching over the guests.
And what happened?
The story goes that a few years back, an employee was decorating for Christmas. They needed space for a big wreath, so they took the general's portrait down and moved it to a back room.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake. Almost immediately, weird things started happening. Guests started complaining about hearing heavy footsteps in the hallways when no one was there. Staff members heard angry whispers.
And the kitchen.
This is the best part. In the kitchen, multiple staff members reported seeing utensils, forks, and spoons flying off the counters and across the room.
Flying forks. So the man is throwing a tantrum from the afterlife.
It certainly seems so. The staff quickly put two and two together. They marched into that back room, grabbed the portrait, and hung it right back up over the fireplace.
In the activity.
Stopped immediately.
He's stubborn. He wants a spot on the wall.
He spent his whole life trying to be the big man, the captain, the center of attention. He's not going to give that up just because he's dead.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We have covered a lot of ground. We've gone from a bankrupt haberdasher in Switzerland to a fake captain in the Sacramento Valley. We've seen the agricultural utopia that was actually a labor camp.
We've seen the gold that destroyed him. We've seen the buried wall in Pennsylvania. It's a massive, complex arc.
So what's the takeaway? When we strip away the myth, what are we left with?
I think Sutter is the ultimate example of the complexity of the American pioneer myth. We want our history to be simple. We want heroes in white hats and villains in black hats. But Sutter was neither. Or maybe he was both.
He was a desperate, opportunistic man.
Extremely. He had an ambition that was powerful enough to build an empire, but that ambition came at a horrific cost to the thousands of indigenous people he trampled to get there.
And ultimately, that same ambition consumed him too.
It did. He wasn't a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. He was a man riding a wave of colonialism, a wave he helped create, and eventually that wave crashed down and drowned him.
It's a reminder that discovery, like the discovery of gold, always has a price tag. And usually the person getting the credit isn't the one paying the price.
Exactly. And if I can leave you with one final thought to mull over, think about those final years in Washington, D.C. Sutter spent decades begging the U.S. government to pay him for the land he lost to the gold miners.
He felt so aggrieved. He felt his property had been stolen.
He was the victim in his own mind. Absolutely.
Sure. But
in all those letters, in all those petitions, he never once, not a single time, considered paying a cent to the people whose land he took to build that empire in the first place.
He demanded a justice for himself that he denied to everyone else.
That is the paradox of John Sutter.
And that is where we leave it. A buried wall for a buried legacy. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.